Good evening, Class 8, and welcome to your history class. Students, on Saturday during our live class, we began with a new history chapter with the name Civilizing the Native, Educating the Nation. And when we began studying that chapter, then we did a lot of discussion on the tradition of Orientalism. So today we are going to do the next topic of this chapter. But before we go to the next topic, let me ask you a few questions. So tell me, what do you mean by Orientalism? Try to recall. I'm sure you're able to recall. So Orientalism is the process of reading Indian text, of reading the texts of the East and translating them into English so that the entire world gets to understand those. Isn't it? Then let me ask you another question. Name some important British Orientalists. So can you answer those? Well, let me help you out. So Henry Thomas Colebrook, Nathaniel Halhed and William Jones. These are some important British officials who were also significantly interested in Oriental studies. That means studies of the East. And who established the Asiatic Society? Well, it is these three people, Halhed, Colebrook and Jones, who together set up the Asiatic Society of Bengal. So we came to know in the last class that the Orientalists were greatly interested in studying India, in studying about the various literatures of India available in the different local languages. They loved to study the various languages of India, and that is why they began translating it to English so that everybody in the world can get a chance to read and know about the rich culture and heritage of India. But everybody did not support this idea of Orientalism. Some British officials were very keen to know about India, while some believed that Indian education, Indian literature was of no use. It was very backward. So this brings us to discuss about the next topic of this chapter, and the name of the topic is Grave Errors of the East. So in this chapter, what are we going to study? Well, in this chapter, we are going to highlight the reasons of criticizing the idea of Orientalist by the British, and then you all will be in a position to explain the need of learning English language in India according to a person, a British educationist whose name was Thomas Babington Macaulay. I repeat, Thomas Babington Macaulay. So let us begin with the class. Grave Errors of the East. So from the very early 19th century onwards, there were many British officials who started to criticize the Orientalist vision of learning. They did not like the idea of translating the Indian books from the local languages into English and throw it for the world to read them. The British who criticized the Orientalist vision, they believed that the knowledge of the East, the books and works of the East, countries like India, was full of errors. They were full of mistakes, and also everything was written without any scientific proof. They believed that Eastern literature, like the literature of India, it was totally non-serious. It was hilarious, and also at the same time it was light-hearted. That means not very serious kind of writing. They also argued that it is wrong for the British to spend so much time in encouraging the study of the Indian languages and literature. The British wanted the Indians to learn English rather than concentrating on learning the vernacular languages. So there was an official, James Mill, as you can see in the picture here. James Mill was one of those officials of the British who attacked the Orientalist, who criticized the Orientalist a lot. The British effort, he said, should not be to teach what the natives wanted or what they respected in order to please them and win a place in their heart. James Mill was so critical about the Orientalists that he declared openly to the British that the main work of the British were not to teach the natives about their local language, local culture, and local tradition. The British should teach the Indians what the British want, not what the Indians wanted. So British officials who criticized the Orientalists like James Mill always said that we should not try to win a place in the hearts of the native Indians. Rather, we should try to dictate them. James Mill also pointed out the aim of education according to the European norms. He said that the main aim or the main goal of education is to teach what was useful, what was practical, what was scientific and logical. They said that since Indian literature, Indian works were very much unethical, very much unscientific, they were illogical. That is why now Indians should be made familiar with the scientific and technical studies, just like the West. They said that rather than concentrating on light-hearted poetry and just on sacred or holy books of the audience, it is necessary for the Indians to concentrate on scientific learning, just like the British. So by the 1830s, the attack on the Orientalists became sharper. People became more and more critical of the Orientalist learning. One of those outspoken and influential of such critic of that time was Thomas Babington Macaulay. His picture is being highlighted here. This person, Thomas Babington Macaulay, he was one of those persons who came out with a policy of education for the Indians, just like the European norms. And he was a grave critic of the Orientalists. He said that India was uncivilized and it needed to be civilized. And this can be done only by introducing Western education, European education to the Indians. He believed that Eastern knowledge, Indian knowledge could not give birth or it could not advance those kind of people whom the British wanted. If people of India study only Eastern knowledge, if they gather only Eastern knowledge, then they will not be productive for the British East India Company. That is why he wanted Indians to be civilized, just like the English people. He declared that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. So he was so critical of the literature of East that he compared the entire literature, the entire collection of literature of India and Arabia to a small to a small library of Europe. Just see the difference. A small library consisting of European languages and all the collection of the books of India and Arabia was compared, where the European library was said to be more superior. He argued that the British government in India should stop wasting the money in promoting Oriental learning because it was practically of no use, because it was of no good to the British. If the British wanted that the Indians serve them, then they should be educated in English. They should be educated through the Western ways. And hence, Macaulay emphasized that people in India need to learn English. He felt that it is only through the knowledge of English that Indians would develop, that the standard of literature of India would develop just like in the West. Okay. He felt that knowledge of English would allow Indians to read some of the finest literature the world had produced. Not the Eastern ones, but of the West. It would make them aware of the developments in Western science and philosophy. So English could thus be a way of civilizing people, changing their taste, values, and culture. So on one hand, we saw that there were British officials who wanted to promote Orientalism, who wanted to study Indian languages, the languages of the other Eastern countries, and there were people who were critical of that. There were people who wanted only English to flourish. They wanted the British only to concentrate on the European literature rather than wasting money and giving importance to Eastern education and language, isn't it? So, what do you think? Was it right for the British officials to criticize the Indian languages or to criticize the entire, collection of literature of the East? Do you think anybody can define how good or how bad a book is just by its language? I'm sure you all have your own opinion regarding that, isn't it? All right. So, keeping in mind Macaulay's instructions, the English Education Act was introduced in 1835. And in 1835, by enacting this law, English was made as the medium of instructions for higher education. That means now people, when they reach a certain age for higher education, then English is the only language in which they need to study the various subjects. Vernacular or local languages were no more promoted and encouraged. So textbooks of English began to be produced for schools in India. All right. So that's all, dear students. Now let us see the 3 questions which I have kept for your homework. So let's see the first one. Thomas Babington Macaulay played a major role in the introduction of English and Western concepts to the education in India. Do you agree? Justify your answer. Well, if you ask me this, then definitely it was only because of Thomas Macaulay that English is the medium of instruction even today in most of the schools. Isn't it? And how did he do so? He did so by introducing the act about which we studied just now in the last slide, isn't it? So what was that act? I think you can read and find that out yourself, won't you? All right, let's go to the next question. Do you think that the idea of James Mill about making Indians familiar with scientific and technical advances is relevant today? Discuss. Well, for me as an individual, I believe that James Mill did very good by introducing scientific and technical advances. But criticizing India based on its language, calling it backward, that was wrong, isn't it? So what are your opinions about it? You can write those down in your copy. Lastly, why did Thomas Macaulay emphasize the need to teach English language in India? Obviously, so that the Indians would be trained in such a language which will be useful for the British to conduct their official works, isn't it? So that's all, dear students, for today. We discussed today regarding the various criticisms that came forward by the British officials against the Orientalists and against Orientalism as a whole. So students, we have finished the second topic of the chapter as well. Go through all these slides well. Listen to the explanation properly, go through your textbook, and then sit to write these 3 answers in your notebooks. We shall meet again in the next class, which is also a live class, where we will continue with the 3rd topic of this chapter. Thank you and have a very good day. And meet you all soon, sharp at 10 through Zoom. Thank you.